we both ended up getting hired as trainees at the same time, going to the academy together. In the academy, I think we got to be like really close friends, and because you really rely on one another at that point. And as soon as we got out of the academy, we got shoved off to field training. Our schedules got kind of split up, and that only lasts for about 6 months, that you're kind of bouncing all around different shifts and graveyard and swings. And then as soon as we both got off training, we ended up wanting to work the same crews, same shift. And so we worked partners in a car.
Weekend graveyards.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays are the best days off, man. So yeah, we ended up working in the car together, and we worked partners for 2 years. And then it was during that time that he actually ended up developing symptoms of ALS, and he ended up getting diagnosed at the age of 26, and then passing away after about a 7-month battle with the disease. And since his passing, I've been involved in other ALS organizations, and, just trying to help drum up support and fundraising for the disease, and just be an advocate for him and his family.
Welcome to the Transition Drill Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Pantiani. I appreciate you taking the time to watch. So let's get into this. Talk to me about racing. How'd you get into it?
Let's see. So I've always been into cars from the time I was a kid. It's always been a fascination of mine, just motors and anything with wheels on it, basically. I'd never really had the means growing up. I didn't come from a well-off family. And then when I finally got into law enforcement and had a pretty good job and everything, my wife was basically like, hey, you know what? Law enforcement's dangerous enough. I don't need you out there driving.
Let's add car racing to it.
Well, initially she was like, I don't need you driving 150 miles an hour on top of that. You're already risking life and limb and everything. And over time I just kept chiseling away. And then probably it's been about 5 or 6 years now. She was finally like, hey, you know what? Why don't you go get yourself, a Mustang and trick it out. And if you want to race, go ahead and race. And so that's what I did. I picked up my first quote unquote race car, which was 2018 Mustang GT performance pack, and then stripped it down, gutted it, threw on some MCS coilovers, Vorschlag performance parts, White Line performance parts, and I do all the work myself. So it's a good opportunity to kind of dig into the cars and develop them, and started off in Autocross at the time, which Autocross is kind of just a small track style racing. It's usually around like cones or like mini tracks, but it's an opportunity to...
It's a slalom style racing, is it?
Yeah. So it really develops you as a driver, because you have to learn a lot of car control and, really, really hone it before you start throwing speed on top of it. So I started doing that, ended up placing second regionally, doing that my very first year racing. And then, I asked for her permission to enter into some local time trial events on some big tracks. And she was a little apprehensive, but she saw I had some skill and everything with it. And so I started racing time trial through, I think, my second year into time trial racing. So now it's been about 3 years in. That year I ended up placing first regionally.
And what is time trial racing?
So time trial racing, it's you basically against the clock. There's usually, depending on the organization, there can be anywhere between, 20 to 30, 40 cars out at one time. And you're not necessarily competing like podium positions against them, but you are competing against them for time. So usually,
I'm assuming over the same course, and you're just seeing who can do it the fastest?
Yeah, so usually there will be time sessions. So you go out anywhere between 20 and 30 minutes. They send the group out, and it's all based on classes. So you have a bunch of different classes running with one another at the same time. If you ever watch like IMSA, and using my imagination a little bit, because we're not IMSA racing, right? That's not, I mean, that's like pro.
Yes,
pro
you
racing.
are.
Yeah. In my mind, that's what we're doing. But if you ever watch IMSA, you have, the GT cars out, you have the LMP cars that are out all at the same time. And it's similar to that, where you have a bunch of different classes all racing at the same time. But again, you're not like racing for 1, 2, and 3 across the finish line. It's who can put down the fastest time through a series of like 20-minute sessions out there. So they send you out. Usually you have about 5 20-minute sessions to try and put down a flyer, and that's your time for the event.
And when you talked about regionally, so we're in Southern California, how far do you have to travel for these races?
So the organization, Super GT, that I race with, we go all up and down California. So I've raced at Thunderhill, as far north as Thunderhill, which is probably an hour and a half outside of Redding. And then, I've raced Sonoma. They race out of Laguna. And then locally down here, you have Willow Springs International Raceway. And then Buttonwillow is another, like, fairly local. It's kind of centrally located near Bakersfield. So, I mean, it's all up and down California.
What's been your favorite course to drive on?
I would consider Willow Springs to be kind of my home course. My favorite course would have to be Sonoma. Yes. Now,
Willow Springs, is that more of a flatter course?
So it actually has quite a bit of elevation change. There is a part of the course, and Willow Springs actually has, I think, 5 tracks, but 2 are primarily used for like time trial racing. I prefer the Big Willow track, and mainly because it's the fastest of the 2. So, I mean, you're hitting 140 miles an hour, and, it is known as the fastest road course in the West. So, and for good reason. But you do there's anywhere between 50 to 100 foot elevation climb throughout the course of the track. So,
and what's the cost for because you're doing this as an amateur, right?
Yeah. So I do have some sponsors that help out with costs and everything, as far as my entry fees, and they're all covered by actually a local brewery out of Anaheim, All American Brew Works. They're also veteran owned and operated. So they reached out to me and wanted to help subsidize some of the costs for racing. So I can happily say that at least my entry fees are covered, and they take care of me in that regard. But even still, a set of, tires can go for between $1,500 to $2,000, $1,500 to $2,000. Gas for the weekend, gas isn't cheap. And then usually, oil and other consumables. So you have your brakes, brake pads, brake rotors, all those things start to add up pretty quick. So
major stuff though, engine, transmission, you blow one of those, you're pretty much done for the weekend.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I don't have the ability to just drop a new engine and
you don't travel with like 6 extra transmissions.
No, I wish.
2
maybe
motors.
Maybe one day, man. But yeah, it's if I blow a motor or transmission, it's game over for the weekend. Actually, that happened to me this last December. Thankfully, it ended up being pretty minor, but the car wasn't happy. It was having some engine troubles at the track, and I didn't have the ability to kind of dig into it there and start figuring out what was going on with it. But ended up being a faulty injector that just it was throwing the timing off on the car, and she wasn't happy. So it was a disaster. But that's racing. That's what can happen. You can have something happen on track, off track, and that can ruin your day or make or break you.
When you going backwards a little bit, you said you always had an interest in cars and racing, but didn't get into it till you were an adult. Was it in your family? I mean, where did it kind of come from?
No, so my dad has always been into like working with his hands. His thing is like woodworking. So he's a carpenter. I mean, he can make all kinds of stuff. And I think growing up with that, and I was probably 5 or 6 at the time. He ended up picking up a project car for him and my older siblings. They didn't really have any interest in it. He tried to get it started with them, and I was too young at the time. But I think maybe that's what kind of helped click in my mind. Like, this would be so cool to work on this thing and fix it up. But, you know, being 5 years old, I could hold a flashlight. Beyond that, that's about it.
And get yelled at.
Yeah, exactly.
For not holding it correctly. So what I was getting at is, so you didn't grow up in a mechanic shop with like your dad, you know, wrenching on cars and stuff like that.
No, I'm YouTube trained. So just, you can learn anything off of YouTube. So, you know, I started buying cars and you know, fixing them on my own. I've owned a 1973 Mustang, a 1969 Mustang. I've rebuilt motors for them. And then obviously with the modern cars are a little bit different, a little harder to work around because of the electronics and everything. So tuning them is a little bit different than, you know, tuning an old school carbureted motor. But I'm still able to tear down the suspensions, rebuild them, and, you know, do pretty much anything. So, and it's pretty much all thanks to YouTube. You know, if you have a question about anything, you can just throw it up on there and then follow along.
I heard a statement last week in an article. YouTube is becoming the new Google. People are going to YouTube a little bit more frequently than they're going to, not obviously to the point where Google's going away, but the number of people that are going to YouTube first just keeps growing each day.
Yeah, I could totally understand that, because we're in an environment now where people don't really want to read about what they're doing. They want to watch it. They want to see. And so we're digesting information a little bit different these days, I think. You know, if I pull up on Google an article about how to throw a 302 and made it to a transmission, that's totally different than watching someone actually physically do it and walking you through the steps. And I think it's a little easier to understand that way. So, and I think it's a natural change to how we digest all that information.
Well, and it goes back to that thing, what they talk about is we spend so much time on our phone watching stuff, not necessarily reading. So it's just a natural evolution to it.
Yep.
Let's take you back though. So growing up, where's hometown? Where'd you grow up at?
So born in Corona, and then I spent most of my life living in Riverside.
And as a young kid, obviously you had an interest in cars, but what were you like? Were you into sports? Were you academic?
A little bit of both, I think. You know, I wasn't necessarily real fond of school. But I think most courses were a little boring for me at the time. And, you know, I'm a very hands-on person, so I like to work with my hands, and learn things that way. So it's a little bit harder for me to sit down and read a book and, like get a lot of information out of it. So, and then, yeah, sports, huge sports guy. I grew up actually playing soccer for 14 years. And then that was probably my primary sport growing up. So yeah, I would say, you know, as a kid, I like, you know, doing what other kids like doing, playing sports, going outside, probably, you know, from elementary through junior high. My favorite subject was probably recess at the time. So
just get me out of the class.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then, yeah, loved, you know, PE classes and everything too. So, yeah, I think that's.
And you've already mentioned other siblings, but there was an age gap. So how many brothers and sisters are there?
Yeah. So we're a blended family. So I have an older sister that I've only met a few times. And then, younger than her, I have another older sister, and then 2 older brothers, and then a younger sister. So in total, there's 6 of us.
And are you the youngest?
Second youngest.
Second youngest.
Yeah.
And growing up, looking at coming towards the end of high school, what were you thinking was going to be your adulthood?
So from the time that I was around 14, 15, I actually had a huge interest in being an Air Force pilot. I am colorblind, so that kind of nixed that opportunity.
That's something we share.
Yeah. So that nixed that opportunity. I think that currently they've made some changes as far as color blindness, and it's not just a blanket like you're colorblind, you can't do these things anymore. They do have a little bit of different testing these days, but at the time,
the blue, yellow, or red, green?
Red, green. Yeah. So red, green, colorblind. So I had to kind of, change gears and figure out what I was going to do with my life. So
were you making steps at that time to potentially go to the Air Force Academy?
Yeah, so I'd already started researching. Actually, one of my buddies who I went to high school with ended up going to the Air Force Academy, and he's still in the Air Force to this day. He's a pilot, so I kind of was linked up with him a little bit. And then again, once that kind of went out the window, it was figuring out, well, I can't do that, so what's option B? And I probably didn't figure out what I wanted to do until I was around 18 or 19 at the time. And then that's when I started expressing an interest in law enforcement.
Prior to that, did you have military in your family that was kind of driving you towards the Air Force?
Yeah. So in my family, one of my sisters was in the Navy. I have cousins and uncles that were either in Army, Marines. My dad and his dad were in the Coast Guard. So I do come from a family that was involved in the military.
Was it a thing of, if I can't fly, then I'm not going in the military? I mean, was it that extreme?
I wouldn't necessarily say that, because I was actually, before I ended up getting hired with Riverside PD, I was at a point in my life where it was, either they picked me up as an officer trainee, or it would have been the military. During that time, it was during the last recession. My dad ended up losing his job and was struggling. My dad's an engineer by trade. So when all the construction bids went out, and you had all these construction companies going under, engineers weren't in demand anymore. My dad was not. He'd been in engineering for 20, 30 years at the time, and so he didn't go to college for it. So you had these kids coming out with 4-year, 6-year degrees out of college, and all of a sudden they look better on paper than my dad, who's been in engineering for 20, 30 years just because they have a diploma. So it was a huge struggle for about 1.5 to 2 years, him just trying to find work. And so as a way to kind of help the family out, I did start pursuing the idea of joining the military. That way, at least I can kick down to them and help, float some of their bills and help take care of my parents. So
were you still looking at the Air Force at that point too?
No. So I was considering the Marines at that point. So,
and what derailed that?
So in talking to a recruiter, I was working as a cadet at the Riverside Police Department at the time. And the training bureau at the PD hit me up and said, hey, you know what, before you submit your app with the Marines, why don't you just hold off? We're going to be opening up hiring because, again, the economy was in the tanks. Nobody was hiring. I don't think they'd hired another officer for like 2 years before that. So they said, hold off. We're pushing something through. You'll be the next up. And then so I held off maybe 2-3 weeks, got a call. They said, put your application in right now and we'll send you to the academy. So that's what I ended up doing. And, it was very fortunate, but it certainly was, I was definitely at a crossroads at that point in my life where something's gotta give one way or the other. And, I have the utmost respect for the people that do serve in our military. And, you know, like I said, my family's been in the military. My cousin lost his life in Iraq. And so I had no qualms about, you know, joining it. But I think just financially, it was a little bit wiser because I was able to help my parents out a little bit more, making a little bit more money on the PD side. So it just made more financial sense for me at the time to go that route.
Do you think if you would have gone in the Marine Corps, you would have considered a career, or probably just one enlistment and then come out? And I want to get back to the law enforcement thing in that, was it already a big enough pull in your life that maybe you would have just kind of gone to the Marine Corps for 4 years and then gotten out?
I think at that point, I had wanted a career in law enforcement, especially because I was working as a cadet at the time. So I don't have any family that was in law enforcement. I'm first generation when it comes to that. And I didn't even really know how to get hired when I you know, started researching it online. I kind of just had to dig around and figure some stuff out on my own. And I didn't know anybody at the Riverside Police Department. So after working there for some time and meeting the other officers, kind of seeing what they do day to day and, you know, being able to hang out with them, I definitely had a strong conviction to join law enforcement. So I think even if I had gone the military route, I probably would have done just the minimum contract time and then gotten out and pursued a career in law enforcement either way. So it had already ingrained itself into you that it was that much of what you wanted to do with your life? Yeah, I would say, you know, for most of us, you would consider law enforcement a calling, and it definitely takes a certain kind of person to do those things. And I would not consider myself an exception to that. I wholeheartedly believe that, you know, I was called to be in law enforcement, and I was going to end up there one way or the other. So what year did you enter the academy? What's that? What year did you enter the academy? So it was, I started December 2009 and then graduated June of 2010. So you're a little over a decade into this career. You're obviously far away from your retirement or your transition. So there's no point for that for this podcast. But what I want to get into was, it was in the academy that crossed that line of racing and racing for ALS. Can you tell me how that came about? Yeah. So I mentioned before, you know, I got hired as a cadet. As a cadet, you're just making minimum wage. Been there, done that. Yeah. I think, you know, $7.50 an hour or whatever was the going rate at the time. And when I was a cadet there, actually met my best friend, whose name is Cory Oakes, and he was a cadet also. And he was kind of in the same boat as me. And we both ended up getting hired as trainees at the same time, going to the academy together. In the academy, I think we got to be like really close friends, and because you really rely on one another at that point. And as soon as we got out of the academy, we got shoved off to field training. Our schedules got kind of split up, and you know, that only lasts for about 6 months, that you're kind of bouncing all around different shifts and graveyard and swings. And then as soon as we both got off training, we ended up wanting to work the same crews, same shift. And so we worked partners in a car. Weekend graveyards. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays are the best days off, man. So yeah, we ended up working in car together, and we worked partners for 2 years. And then it was during that time that he actually ended up developing symptoms of ALS, and he ended up getting diagnosed at the age of 26, and then passing away after about a 7-month battle with the disease. And since his passing, I've been involved in other ALS organizations, and, you know, just trying to help drum up support and fundraising for the disease, and just be an advocate for him and his family. And it was probably around 2020 that someone sent me a post by Racing for ALS. And the funny thing is that at the time, the person that sent this to me didn't know any of my backstory with ALS or that I was involved in these other ALS things. It was just, social media thing. And so I kind of saw what they were about and, keyed in on the organization, started reading up on them and what they were about. And, Scott and Dave Lloyd out of the East Coast are the founders of it. And Dave was diagnosed with ALS in 2018, and they're both car guys, car nuts. They had aspirations of doing amateur racing when they retire and just having fun doing brother stuff. And when Dave was diagnosed, it kind of opened their eyes to, hey, we have a limited amount of time now to enjoy these things, and let's make the best of it. So they both bought Camaro Z28s and started racing them for fun. And then I think, and you talk to them, they saw an opportunity to do some good, and so they started the organization. Initially, I reached out to him, was like, hey, I'd like to do some local fundraising for you guys, just, sell some apparel, do whatever, and try and help your organization out. So they jumped on board with that.
Were their initial races only on the East Coast?
Yeah. So out of Virginia International Raceway is where they were primarily operating out of. After that first little run of some like merchandise and apparel for them, I kind of told them my backstory with ALS and, kind of pitched the idea of starting a race out here in dedication to Cory. And it just so happened the timing was perfect because they were kind of outgrowing their local events, and they were wanting to, turn it into a national level organization. And so again, timing was impeccable. And so they said, hey, you know what? We like who you are. We are going to trust you with, it was a phenomenal amount of trust because I never even met the guys face to face, and they're willing to, reserve the tracks and let me run with it. And, it's not cheap. We do have a overhead endowment as a part of the organization that pays for all that stuff, but it's still a phenomenal level of trust for them to just let a stranger through Instagram run with their organization, their brand, and try and represent them in a positive way. So,
are you finding yourself almost kind of getting phased out of the racing and more of the administration of it?
No. So what's so neat about the events is, I would say as far as like my individual competitive racing, I've kind of put that on the back burner now because
you're not any good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't want to overstate the obvious.
Well, you know what, man?
Everybody needs a reality check.
Hey, it's all, if I were that good, I'd probably be an IMSA, right? No, it's certainly the idea of I can do more in this world by not, doing the things that I want to do, but by reaching out to others, helping others, and doing those things. So it was an opportunity to, just affect more people's lives than, just my own, and just do things out of selfishness. So, yeah. And through these contacts that I've made with Racing for ALS and going out to these different businesses locally and nationally, it's crazy the amount of people that I've ran into that have been personally impacted by ALS. We have another local family out of West Covina that lost their dad to ALS. And, he worked West Covina PD, was one of their SWAT guys for, I want to say like 15 years. And, he ended up shortly after retirement, being diagnosed and losing his life to it. And he's got young kids. His whole family came out to the event last year, and, and this is what I mean, the impact that you can have on these people's lives is, extraordinary, because his son was a huge Formula One fan, and for him to come out, jump in my car, go out on a racetrack, drive 150 miles an hour, he was beside himself. And, it's an opportunity that, it's a terrible disease that, inflicts so much pain on so many people's lives. But we can do something positive, and, we can hold these events, and have fun and dedicate these events to these families. And, it's an opportunity to generate much needed funds for not only research, but Racing for ALS benefits 3 separate organizations. So you have ALS TDI, which would be the direct cure research facility, and then Duke Neurology, the School of Medicine. We send money to them too, and they're actually researching around 30 to 35 cases of ALS reversals. So these are people that had some in late stage ALS that all of a sudden, their motor neurons started working again, and they regained function, and, they basically, the disease went into remission for unknown reasons. They weren't taking any particular, drugs or anything, or any cures, or, so they're working on that end, trying to figure out what the connection is there. And then on top of that, we also have the ability to offer a patient assistance program. So with Cory and his diagnosis, it costs around $60,000 to $65,000 a year for a patient with ALS to just meet their minimum needs. You're talking about all the doctor's visits, the different equipment that's required, the different care that's required, in-home care. And something that would have benefited Cory was a BPAP machine while he slept, and dealing with his insurance company and them dragging their feet. And if you've ever had to deal with insurance for anything, things don't move quickly. So, but ALS does move quickly. And
did Cory have it in his family?
So no, there was no known connection to him with ALS. And this is the thing about ALS, is we know a little bit more today than we knew about it when Lou Gehrig had it. And so you're talking the last 70, 80 years, it's kind of just, we haven't figured out a whole lot new. It is understood that there is a familial connection, and you'll actually see that with Vince's race this year, because Vince, who we're dedicating the race to this year, actually before his passing had cared for his mom, who was diagnosed with ALS 7 years before. And so his mom was diagnosed with ALS. He cared for her through the disease. She eventually lost her life to it. And then it wasn't 7 years until he had been diagnosed and lost his life to the very same disease. So there is a familial connection to it. In the military and in law enforcement, you have about a 1.5 times or 150% chance, higher chance of being diagnosed with ALS. And they think that it is likely due to some environmental factors. It could be stress, trauma, it could be injuries, it could be exposure to certain chemicals, and so it is understood that there is some type of environmental impact, because there's a direct correlation to certain jobs that transitions over to your chances of developing ALS. And the other difficult part with the disease is most patients that are diagnosed with it will pass away within 2 to 3 years. So trying to develop a drug for something that claims lives so quickly is difficult, because you don't have a lot of time to observe it. And on top of that, it takes about a year just to diagnose someone with ALS, because I can't just draw your blood and say, hey, you know what? You have increased white blood cells. This looks like it's some form of, leukemia or cancer or something. It's literally, you have to rule out every other neurodegenerative disease before you come up with ALS. So there's a family of these diseases, and MS is another one. But they have to rule out all those other ones. And again, it takes right around a year. So you're talking about people going through these symptoms, they're losing their different abilities, their different, you're losing the ability to walk, to write. And all the while they can't give you an answer about what's going on with your body. So it certainly is, there's some missed opportunities there, because I think a lot of us take for granted, just how fragile our lives can be and our existence can be. And the last thing that someone thinks when they're 26 years old is, I'm going to be fighting a fatal disease that, can claim my life in as little as a year.
Well, not to overgeneralize this, but the worst part about it is it doesn't target a specific age range. I was directly impacted by it at the end of last year. A close friend of my wife and I, talking to him in August, hey, I'm going to go, he was in his 60s. I'm going to go in for a shoulder surgery, but we both had been doing the breast cancer walks for many years. And the plan was to see him in November. And getting closer to the event, he's like, I don't know what's going on. I can't recover my strength. And then I see him in November, and he could barely lift his arm on his own. He'd been diagnosed at that point in time, and they were trying to get him into a STEM program. And getting him into a STEM program was just going to get him to where, maybe hold him where he was at, not even improve it. And then first of the year, passed away. It's crazy when you listen to the stories of how rapidly it comes on, and then people lose their lives.
Yeah. It works incredibly fast in many cases. There will be some anomalies where it can slow down and kind of just stop for a while. And again, it's literally every single patient has a different interaction with ALS. It's not the same in any one particular person. So, it's amazing. And, ALS, I almost hate to compare it to, terrible things like cancer, but if you have a cancer diagnosis, at least you can fight. You can do things that can fight it.
Right.
It's currently right now they diagnose you with ALS, and it is an absolute death sentence. There's not even with current the current medicines available, they estimate that those drugs and things can net you about 2 to 3 weeks on the end of your life. So if that's your option, do I want to live for another 2 to 3 weeks and take these, experimental drugs? So that's why this research and this funding is so important, because, it's classified as a rare disease, but I kind of challenge that, because they say that there's anywhere between 30 to 50,000 patients in the United States living with ALS, but because it works so quickly and claims lives so quickly, that number I feel like is kind of deflated a little bit, that it should be higher, but people are dying so quickly from it that
before they're actually diagnosed. Yeah,
it almost seems like it's this rare disease, but it's not. Every 90 minutes, a new patient is diagnosed with ALS, and every 90 minutes, someone dies from ALS. So it's this constant cycle of, new patients coming in and patients going out because of the disease.
When was the first year? So when was the first year you raced for ALS?
Last year. Yeah. So I started planning the event, in 2020, and it was getting some legs under it, getting it off the ground, finding and, garnering, public support. And we had our first event, which was July of, 2022. And that event was, for Cory Oakes. So it was called Cory's Race. And again, because of, just the realization that so many lives have been impacted locally by this disease. And, in the motorsports world, I'd gone down to get a fire suit altered, and I was going down to the Sparco headquarters, which is in Irvine, California, and while I'm down there, I was wearing a Racing for ALS shirt at the time, and the kid who's probably 19, 20 years old, who's helping me out at the counter, kind of asked me about my shirt. And so I kind of give him the Cliff Note version as to what Racing for ALS is and everything. And he kind of looks at me and he's like, "Hey man, I just want to say that's really cool that, my dad actually passed away from ALS, and his dad was really into racing, raced at Willow Springs all the time. And so he actually ended up coming out to the event. And that's what I mean is, you have Larry's family. Larry is the West Covina PD SWAT guy that lost his life to it. You have Brandon, who's the Sparco employee who came out. I'm able to take all these people out on a track. It's almost therapeutic, right? It's almost a chance for them to be involved with the racing community, but also the ALS community as a whole. You have many people that haven't been impacted by ALS, just race cars and want to help generate, funds and awareness for this disease. And, they're able to come out and connect with these families and understand just like the gravity of what this disease is, because prior to Cory being diagnosed with ALS, I had no idea what the disease was, what it was about, how it impacted people. And, it's just kind of one of those things that you kind of heard about. Like I'd heard about Lou Gehrig's, but I didn't understand what it was and, what people face when they are diagnosed with such a terrible disease.
Are your races, so am I understanding correctly, then it's only a one West Coast race and the one East Coast race currently?
So right now we have 6 events on the books. Most of the events are held on the East Coast, up and down the East Coast from Virginia to North Carolina. And we are basically the event that pushed it to being a national level organization now. So, we are the sole event out on the West Coast. Last year they did, it wasn't a race put on by Racing for ALS, but there is another organization that actually dedicated a 25-hour endurance race up at Thunderhill Raceway, and then all the proceeds from that went to benefit Racing for ALS. So they ended up linking up with us too. So that was really neat. And it's crazy how much the organization has grown. And, the first 4 years that Racing for ALS has been around and been doing these events, we ended up fundraising more last year than those previous 4 years combined. So, and you can see just the exponential growth and the public support is there. And they just need to be reached. That's all.
I hope I remember all my questions that will it always be at Willow Springs for the most part on the West Coast? Is that how it's looking?
So that absolutely can change. For the time being, just with all the moving parts and until we kind of get a bit more established on this coast, I think it'll probably remain there. It is the most local for us and the contacts that I've been developing. But again, as this, inevitably grows and gets bigger, we'll definitely be looking at, other tracks. And we had considered running it out of, Sonoma or Thunderhill, which would be up north, or even Buttonwillow. But just to kind of help, keep some consistency with it and develop. So that's the other thing, is that as a racer, I have a relationship with these tracks. As an organizer, I have almost no relationship with the tracks. So it's almost the more that you interact with the tracks and the more dates that you've booked, you get kind of preferential treatment when it comes to certain dates. So last year we ran our event in July, which was incredibly hot at Willow Springs. I mean, we actually ended up being lucky that the weather was in our favor, because it was only 98 degrees there during that
only
event.
98.
Yeah. So
cars perform well when it's really hot.
Sure.
Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. They work their best when they're hitting, 220 degrees. So it's incredibly hard on the cars. Obviously, it's incredibly hard on the tires. So this year, because our event was so successful, you know, we weren't an organization that stiffed the track, or, you know, we respected them and what they expected from us. You know, we ended up getting, you know, a prime date in April now, which is perfect weather. So it is one of those things that we want consistency for the drivers, as we are kind of a new event on this coast, and until that develops a little bit more, and then obviously the preferential treatment helps out too. So, but by all means, just because we run out of Willow Springs currently doesn't mean that we won't look to other tracks in the future. You know, I was having a conversation with Scott, the president of Racing for ALS, last week, and kind of asked him, you know, what are your feelings about announcing our next race at Vince's race this year? And he said, absolutely, by all means. So he's already given us his blessing for planning next year and getting, you know, the ball moving in that regard. So we're already, you know, this event's approaching rapidly, but we're already looking to next year's event too.
And along that same line, if somebody's listening and has an interest in trying to get their family member's name as the sponsored race or the named race for a year, how does that go about?
So right now, I just have kind of basically a rotating list as I've developed these contacts and met these families. I'm basically just take down their name, and ask them, hey, so on my race car, I actually have on the trunk all the names of the family, the individual, but in contacting their families, I've been allowed to place their name on the trunk of my car as kind of a tribute to that person. And, you know, so through, you know, any personal racing events or anything, it's, you know, they're represented and out there. And so that's basically how it's running right now is, you know, each and every year I'll just work down the list until basically we run out of names, right? And the day that we run out of names will be the day that this disease is probably cured, and we don't have to worry about it anymore. But if anybody is listening and, you know, they've been impacted, they've lost family members, friends, loved ones to this disease, feel free to reach out. And I would be absolutely honored and floored to be able to represent them on the track as well. And, you know, their name will get added to the list. And, you know, if that's something that the family is okay with, obviously not every family desires that, and it can bring up a lot of past emotions and everything. But if that is something that the family is wanting to do, we absolutely would be honored to be able to do that for them.
From a racer perspective, what's the minimum standard as far as car type, car requirements?
So you'll see a wide range of cars at these events. So this event in particular is a non-competitive. It's competitive in the sense that each driver is fundraising. So it's a competition in that regard. The driver that raises the most funds, we get really cool trophies that we make and everything. And so they podium based off of how much they fundraise for the event. But as far as the actual driving and the date itself, it's classified as a high performance driving event. So it's non-competitive. You go out there, have fun. I would say that we allow only advanced and intermediate drivers. So it's not necessarily the capabilities of the car, but the capabilities of the driver at the event. And again, if we get a huge interest in, you know, beginners wanting to go out and learn how to race, we do have instructors that are signed up with us that can assist with that. But I think for this year, it'll be advanced and intermediate level. And then, you know, we'll have cars out there from Lamborghinis all the way down to Mazda Miatas. So, and again, that's the thing with racing is it's not necessarily the car and its capabilities, it's the driver and their capabilities. Cause you can have, you know, I in my Camaro last year, I was passing up, you know, Dodge Viper ACRs and cars that are technically far superior to my car, but just being able to wield those things is a different story. So
it's all that EVOC training we got.
It must be.
made us race car drivers.
Yeah, that's right.
You mentioned something previously about taking people on a ride along on the track. Is that something that only you're offering as a driver, or many drivers offer that option?
No. So any of our drivers that obviously have a spare seat in their car can take ride-alongs. We don't have beginners out there this year, so there's a lot of trust placed in our drivers when they do take passengers, especially if they don't know them. So we do require a waiver, and then we kind of screen who gets to take passengers out on the track if it is someone that doesn't know this person, because we want them to be comfortable and know, if an intermediate level driver comes out and they bring their family or friends or something, then you guys can get in the car because you guys will be comfortable with him. But I'm not going to put, a stranger into a car with another person without me knowing who that driver is and trusting them to take them out there, because again, we're all out there to have fun, have a good time, but it is a dangerous sport. Things can happen, and we want to mitigate those as much as possible.
And is it an entire weekend or just a single day event?
This is a single day event. On the East Coast, for those East Coast listeners, they do have it is a weekend event. So their event, I believe, is in the beginning of July, which will be Dave's race. And they run the entire weekend, and it's a blast.
So we've talked all the way around it. What's the date of your event this year?
Our event this year is April 29th. And again, it'll be at Willow Springs International Raceway, which is in a little town called Rosamond. But basically, I tell everybody it's near Lancaster. So.
And what's the website for somebody to go to find the landing page?
You can go to racingforals.com, and that'll have all the information. It'll have all of the events nationwide. And then our event, again, on the West Coast, is Vince's race.
And for you personally, where do you see yourself? Do you think you'll continue with the racing, or do you see yourself moving more into this organizer role, just across the board?
Yeah, so I would say that's conflicting, man, because because
you've already mentioned you've upgraded. You went from a Mustang to a Camaro, so you've upgraded.
I have. There's no doubt about that, man. I think racing will always be in my blood, but I do feel that I am particularly called to be involved with Racing for ALS as an organizer. And, if at any point in time, my ability to, organize these events is in direct conflict with driving, or driving's taking up too much of my bandwidth for Racing for ALS and organizing it, then, that's naturally the racing's gotta get tuned down a little bit. And, because I'm in this to help people, and the way that I'm going to do that isn't by driving. It'll be by organizing these events and getting the awareness out there, getting the fundraising where it needs to go. And, so I hope and pray that those don't ever become at odds. But yeah, if ever it needed to, I needed to drop one or the other, it would be racing before I drop organizing these events.
But before you dropped it, would IMSA be your first next goal?
That would be like the pinnacle goal, right?
Oh, okay.
That would be like, if I could be a professional driver, that would be the end goal, would be to race in IMSA, because you're talking basically driving for, like Le Mans style level of racing. Currently I'm building the car out and saving up money in order to do so for national level organizations. So NASA is one of them, and then for grid life style events. And then, if I'm successful.
What's different about those events?
So Grid Life hosts like Formula D, but they also do like time attack during their events also. It's in in my view, probably a little bit more fun than the NASA level events, but NASA is a little bit more serious when it comes to racing. They run, they have a endurance race that they run at most events, and then they do the time trial racing as well. I think endurance would be an awesome opportunity too, just to be able to get out there. I think I wouldn't run the Camaro for an endurance race. I'd probably get like a little Miata or something for that, but just cheaper with tires, and it's probably about half the expense in tires alone. But and then if I can be successful in those events, we'll see. The biggest thing with racing, and you can truly be the best driver in the world and not have the right connections, and nothing will ever happen. But if you have the right connections and you're not the best driver in the world, you could be IMSA level driver, and it just kind of how it shakes out is you gotta have the pocketbook and kind of the gift of gab and everything, and that's a big thing, is being able to get sponsors to adopt you, and wanting to subsidize your hobby as it is.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. It is definitely a hobby that if you want to try to grow into it or grow with it, you need a large bank account behind you. Yep. And a lot of times the car that wins isn't necessarily because of the best driver. It's sometimes that car just didn't break down.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it totally is. And you see that with Formula One too. You have all these top tier drivers, and it's usually the same teams that win over and over, and that's usually because they have the deepest pocketbooks, and they do have phenomenal drivers, but they can also pay their drivers much higher than these other teams can pay their drivers. So naturally, the best drivers want to make it to those teams too. So
yeah, my brother-in-law is along the same lines, but he's desert racing, and building out his car, and his goal ultimately is to run the Baja 1000. He went down last year, and again, mechanical.
Yep.
When you're the amateur without the trailer that's got 5 extra engines and 12 extra transmissions, your weekend ends pretty quickly.
Yeah. And the pit crew that goes along with that, because even if you do have that extra engine, you need extra hands to be able to drop it, and, drop the subframe or lift it out, and, made it back up and get on the road and start racing again. So it takes a lot of manpower, a lot of money, and it's right now it's still a hobby for me, right?
How many weekends a year are you tied up with racing on average? So
usually it'll be about an event a month for the most part. So it's about one event a month that I'll make, and then with the organization that I am currently racing with, they allot for 2 drops a year. So you can take two drops, and it won't penalize you for the rest of the events.
And you're racing on a point system. So at the end of the year, most points is the overall winner?
Yes. Yeah. So each and every race, obviously you have your podium for those events, but then there's an overall podium for the overall events.
And what was it that caused you to go from the Mustang to the Camaro? Was it just a newer car, or was there something specific that you were going for?
So the Camaro is a bit more balanced. The development for the SS1LE that I race now, there was a lot more foresight that was put into it when the developers were building it out. And I've actually talked with one of the guys that had a hand in doing that, and they basically baselined this Camaro with the Ford GT. So they took a lot of ideas and concepts from the Ford GT and translated it over to the Camaro, which almost sounds like counterintuitive, right? But you're talking about a hypercar, and they're trying to turn just a regular, muscle car into a hypercar. But the balance of it is phenomenal. The weight and the power distribution is awesome. And the Camaro hasn't tried to kill me yet. The Mustang tried to kill me, so I lost it at probably 115 miles an hour on a track, and after that, I told it it's gone now. So yeah, so there's that too. But yeah, like I said, things happen and on and off track, and I moved on to a better platform. So
now, what would you say you have into the sport, or more importantly, what does your wife think you have into the sport?
Financially, let's see. So I have trailer, I have a tow rig, the car, and then, so just those alone would be probably about 120,000. And then you're talking most weekends when you go out and race, can it be anywhere between $1,000 to $2,000 for a weekend. So depending on how many events you pick up, you could be anywhere between 10 to 20,000 per year in consumables and hotels and all that too. So gas and
for the person who's probably listening, who's not into racing, they're probably thinking that's a garbage ton of money. And probably in reality, you are at the very bottom rung of the ladder as far as money.
Yeah. That's seems like a lot of money, but that's basically, and there are those that spend less. Obviously, I drive a heavier car, a car that uses more gas. The tires probably cost double what, again, these little Mazda Miatas run. So it can certainly be cheaper to get into racing. But for me, like, I've always been into muscle cars, just again, going back to when I was a kid, I loved V8s. Almost every car I've ever had has had a V8 in it. So, I just love the sound. I can't stand the sound of a Mazda Miata spooling up on track. So yeah, I think it would annoy me. I'd have to drive with earplugs or something the whole time. So yeah, it's just different environment. And I enjoy it, man. I will say that, again, really want to emphasize the fact that none of the money that we raise from the Racing for ALS goes to pay any of our expenses for racing. Those are all paid out of pocket, or through like individual sponsors themselves. Right. So none of that money, if you go online right now and you donate, 100% of your funds that you donated go to that ALS research or helping ALS patients get the equipment that they need.
If somebody has more questions for you, how can they get in touch with you?
So you can reach out to me through Instagram, Wilder Racing. It's WILDER, just my last name, and then racing. You can also email me if you don't have social media, wilderracingteam@gmail.com. If you go to Racing for ALS, you can reach out to us through Racing for ALS too, and their website, and the email there. They'll get your email over to me, and we can conversate back and forth that way.
And I'll put all of those in the show notes so people can get to those links also. I wish you the best with the event and growing it, the continued growth of it. And maybe it becomes a much bigger event. Unfortunately, or fortunately for you, it takes you out of the driver's seat and more into the executive seat. But it sounds like you've definitely found a passion.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for having me out here. It's a phenomenal opportunity. And again, if I feel called to, be an advocate for not only Cory, his family, but now an advocate for all these other families that have been impacted, and, being a voice for them. And if I can do that through racing, then so be it.
All the continued success. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate you watching. But before you go, if you like the video, please hit that subscribe button. Also, any comments are appreciated. Thank you.